Hi, welcome to The Weaver Sews. I'm Daryl Lancaster. I'm a huge fan of tracing off patterns, leaving the original intact. I'll trace off the size and the details that I want, whether it's a commercial pattern, typically the tissue paper, or whether it's a Berta style magazine with the pattern in the center, or it's a downloaded pattern like the Daryl Lancaster Pattern Collection. And a link for this, for the e-shop where I sell these, will be in the description below. There are huge advantages to tracing patterns, but first I'd like to talk about what medium to trace with. My favorite medium is a product called Red Dot Tracer by HTCW. It's a little hard to find in commercial fabric shops since most stores carry Pellon, which I'll get to shortly. I sell this in my e-shop. A link will be in the description below. It is slightly opaque but transparent enough to see through to the original pattern underneath. It has a printed 1-inch grid of dots. And by lining up the grain line of the pattern with a row of red dots, the entire pattern piece has a grid, which is very helpful for fitting, alterations, and lining up the grain lines when cutting out fabric. Other options are by Pellon. They make a product called True Grid, which is a pattern tracing medium with a 1-inch grid of blue lines. It looks a bit like graph paper. Pellon also makes a version of Red Dot Tracer. Try to feel the tracing medium before you buy it. Earlier versions of both Pellon's True Grid and their version of Red Dot Tracer were printed on a base that pulls apart. And that isn't the best choice for keeping patterns true to the original. The goal here is to trace off onto something that is stable. Swedish tracing paper is inexpensive and it's stable. It comes on a roll and it's available all over the internet. Though Swedish tracing paper does not have a grid, it's easy to add one. Just draw a 3 to 4 inch grid on each pattern piece, parallel and perpendicular to the grain line. One of the advantages of tracing off the size and details you want from a multi-size pattern is that the original pattern, with its set of sizes and important grading schematic, are preserved. The traced version can then be sewn together to do a preliminary try-on to see if the garment will fit and that key design features are in the correct place, like darts, pockets, armholes, etc. Tracing off the pattern requires a couple of simple tools. I use an old-fashioned cardboard cutting board. Mine is well used. Fold it a couple of times to give me depth to pin into. I use standard push pins from the office supply store. Sometimes I find fancy ones that make me smile. If the grid of the cutting board makes you a little confused, flip the board and work from the wrong side. First, I anchor the original pattern in a couple of places. And then I overlay the tracing medium. Check to see if there's a wrong side and a right side to the printed grid. One side may be darker than the other. Line up a row of red dots, or whatever grid you have, with the grain line, or the center front or back if it's on the fold, like this pattern. Carefully anchor the two together into the cardboard cutting board so nothing shifts. Use colored pencils or a graphite pencil to trace the size and the details that you want. I prefer Prismacolor pencils. They leave a dark mark, but they get dull quickly, so I keep a sharpener nearby. There are lots of rulers out there to help get the job done. A see-through straight edge is important. Try to get a long one. I like this styling design ruler for its curves and armhole shaping. I picked this one up at a sewing conference. The entire ruler width is 5/8 of an inch, which will help when adding seam allowance, as in the case when tracing Berta style magazine patterns. My patterns all come with 5/8 inch seam allowance, unless otherwise stated. It's always a good idea to label each piece, where it came from, and what size or combination of sizes you traced. My patterns contain lots of match points. These will be important during the construction steps. To check that you have traced all of the match points, refer to page 2 of the intro of my pattern. It will show you where all the match points should be. So now I'm actually going to demonstrate tracing the pattern. And I'm going to make sure I draw in all the important details that I want, the darts. And I'm also going to show you how it's easy to combine sizes. So now I'm going to show you how I can combine sizes easily on the side seam. I have traced the blue line. My patterns come in color sizes instead of numerical sizes. And I have finished tracing the blue to right under the arm. Down at the bottom, I'm going to mark the orange line. And it's very simple to just take my long straight edge and connect the two. So this would give me a little bit more in the hip if I were to need it. Continue until all of the required pattern pieces are traced, and then pin or machine baste the main pieces together for a preliminary fit. Check if this is the size that you want, that details are where you want them, and if this design is really worth taking to the next step. The traced pattern will be really helpful in cutting out hand-woven fabrics. This is assuming that the pattern was traced with the grid parallel and perpendicular to the lengthwise grain or center front or back lines. That's really important. Sometimes I will actually trace a full back so that I don't have to flip the pattern and worry about cutting through the center back. Don't laugh, it happens. With very complicated layouts, I'll actually trace a second set of mirrored patterns so that I can do a full layout without having to flip the pattern. I always cut hand-woven fabrics singly. This is super important. Hand-woven fabrics are more likely to be skewed or off-grain, and seeing only one layer allows more control in the cutting. The advantage of the traced pattern with a grid is that you can somewhat see through the medium, allowing the ability to line up design features in the pattern with design lines in the fabric. And that would be especially helpful in a striped fabric like this. Start first by squaring up the fabric as best you can with a gridded cutting board. I like to lay a T-square across to really check if the wefts are perpendicular to the warp thread. Now I'm going to pin a row of dots parallel to the grain line along a warp thread. And in this case, because I have to cut 2 backs, the fabric is not wide enough for a full back, I'm going to add seam allowance at the fold line by just laying the fold 5/8 inch off of the selvage edge. That will automatically give me a clean finished edge. Fold the pattern back on different rows of red dots across the length. Check to see if the pattern is accurately laid out. Then, this is important, begin to fold the pattern along the crosswise rows of red dots. Check to make sure they line up with the weft. Sometimes this is really hard to see when strong twills are involved. And in some cases, I've actually pulled a thread to create a fresh weft fell line before laying out the next pieces. If you haven't used a gridded tracing medium before, you'll find it a great resource and an important addition to your arsenal of tools for sewing handwoven fabrics. I'm Daryl Lancaster for The Weaver Sews.